don't like capitalism. They just need to point it out more, which is kind of what Vaush does, and good on him for it. What I don't like about him is that he shits on other types of leftism, especially people outside of America. And there's chauvinism and nationalism there that I do not fucking like, and that's why anarcho-Bidenism is meant to be an insult, not something you actually go like, yeah, I'm an anarchist and I'm voting Biden. So on to that. I will now actually kind of talk about Vaush, but not so much Vaush, more as a conversation starter to other things. This is something I was literally just 5 minutes in. I kind of, it's not rage quit, but when I feel like I could be giving better answers, right? So I'm still going to be like, I'm not scripted here at all. So I actually forgot exactly all the major points I wanted to hit on, but I'm just gonna, let's watch some Vaush.
Yeah, you sound fine. All right.
As I do quite a bit, and I've been watching him for since he started getting bigger, a whole year and a half ago. All right, I'm not some latecomer who's just saying Vaush bad because of some other bullshit. No, I'm a nuanced critic here.
All right, hit me up. Give it to me.
All right, so quick thing. I recently started getting into more of your content and like Destiny's content pre or post COVID because
Questioning.
I had no life, so that was the only thing I could do. And
That's too
before
bad.
that, I was like a Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro kind of person. My whole family's conservative, all that stuff, and
So this is definitely the Vosh's stated strategy. He pulls people who are very far right or in that right media pipeline, and he pulls them to the center, right? But what's counter to that is then when, in order to like say pull people to the center, he has to then shit on other leftists, unless they're perhaps, as he recently had a conversation with Zoe, a narco pack, and they had I didn't listen to it, but he says it was a productive conversation about direct action, right? So it's like, okay, do the one thing, then just stop having inter-left conversations. Just talk to right wingers. As like when I watched Destiny a bit, and I enjoyed his videos where he's destroying Nazis, right? That's fun. I get why that's fun to watch, but it's not productive as far as can we actually like do something good for the world and not just be entertained, right? So there's entertainment and there's political content as entertainment. And then there's what I like to do or want to do, which is inter-left communication where we're actually building a left for itself of itself and a left that isn't in the state that it is, where you see it implode because one lefty celebrity, Jimmy Dore, wants to push harder on dem soaks in Congress. The 8 that we have. And the strategy of progressives is we elect another 8 of them, and then we have the Dems right where we want them. Or a simple question they need to answer is, how many South Dems do we have to elect in order to get single payer? Because you see, in New York, I was part of the campaign, not canvassing, mind you, but lobbying, rallying, being mobilized for single payer in New York. We have almost every Democratic senator as a co-sponsor. This was before the last election. This was before more Dem soaks were elected, mind you, right? We had almost all the Democratic senators, and we had already passed single payer in New York in the Assembly twice. We did not pass it this year because you see this year, or rather by this year I mean 2020, last year. Now it could have actually passed the Senate too. Now the Assembly isn't going to vote on it again. And it could pass the Senate, but then the governor, Cuomo, would veto it. But see, that's the game Democrats play. How many Dem soaks do we have to elect before it could be passed? Before pressure or the campaign the pressure will be put on Cuomo. Because that's kind of the next step, and that's where we Greens are attempting to get the rest of our single payer coalition to stop just being nice and to start acting like the anti-fracking movement was. We banned fracking in New York because we weren't playing nice with the Dems. And that included all these progressives and all of these non-leftists and moderate Republicans who cared about land conservation, because when the pipelines were being built, it didn't matter what your fucking political affiliation was. It was getting you were getting eminent domain either way. Anyway, another deviation from the topic at hand.
You guys have pushed me more towards the middle, but still not all the way. And the big thing is just more so.
Vaush, fail.
I feel like there needs to be a middle
fail
ground.
to
So
you
in
fail
order
to
have
pull
a
them
middle
all
ground,
away.
you need far on both sides, and I think you do the far on the left. Conservatives are a little bit more on the right, and it'll go more towards the center.
So I was watching
get
this
more
with
of
my
like a
breakfast
side.
the other day.
Well, if you moved over to being
Yeah. As I think Vaush says it in a way I wouldn't, but it's like, oh, you say you're moderate now, and you're a sock dem. Sock dem is moderate, actually. Good job. It's nice
a
that he knows
them
that.
from being a Steven Crowder fan, that's an enviable movement. I can't complain about it. Did you have anything in particular you wanted to disagree about?
Yeah, the big thing is.
And why did he ask him for what he disagreed with? Why not ask him like, what did I say that brought you back? Like, what was it? Just my verbal assaults on covering Crowder? What why not explore what worked and what didn't? Instead, just let's pick at the differences.
Well, first, tell me what your stance is on like promoting personal choice over talking about the how we're all creatures of our environment and that sort of stuff.
I mean, it depends on what your job is, right? If you're an environmental psychologist, or if you're a politician or therapist, I mean, it depends on like from where you're standing, right? Like from my position.
So Bosch has his own way, as we all would, to responding to certain questions and things. So I'm not critiquing how Vosh does it. I'm just going to do my own version of it, of my response, because I don't yet have moderates in my chat, or because I don't have a chat. This is the first time I'm literally doing this, and I only have my one follower here, lovely, a Brent. If I could just call you that. Like, I would bring up collective responsibility, that our culture does not bring up collective responsibility, and that what is usually sought, or what could be sought by the left, is a balance between individual and collective responsibility. The thing about meritocracy and your ideology of America, or capitalism, is that it puts everything on individual responsibility and not the collective. Or when, say, there's a social program taking care of people, it's not framed as collective responsibility, or at least that phrase is not used. It's just phrased as a moral imperative or some feelings-based argument, not as much a philosophical one, like collective responsibility.
Like, it is a fact of the matter that people respond predictably to given environmental stimuli, and that if you want to change how people behave, you have to change their environment. But like, if I was talking to my friend, like if I had like a black friend or whatever, I wouldn't just say, yeah, your outcomes are because of your zip code. You were born here and you're black. I would like encourage them to do whatever they can to maximize their own well-being,
Like organizing, like doing leftist things. See, he phrases it as personal actions, right? Personal action could be joining a union, or joining an organization or social club. And I saw a nice little tweet or a Facebook post where it was about, oh wait, maybe I can actually bring it up. Was it something I could bring up now? Via Facebook here. I could just mention it. It was a meme where union membership is like having a gym membership. Yeah, you could pay it every month, but it's only worth it if you actually go work out. You actually have to take an action related to your membership. Go to meetings or interact with the meetings. Or, just watch them. watch the Slack chat.
For advantages or disadvantages.
Be aware of the problems.
I think there's a big difference between talk about this to like a person you know, as opposed to like making broad social prescriptions.
Do you think what you do can have that impact on individuals?
I mean, everyone does everything to individuals, technically, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we are if you break it all.
I don't know what Vaush means by this, because obviously when the state takes action, they're taking action against groups. Maybe it's an individual writing it, but no, under political authority, there are groups working on other groups. So this is like, for a sociologist major, a sociology major, he seems to be ignoring quite a bit of sociology theory here, where you have individuals and individuals, you have groups and individuals, you have groups and groups. And that's society.
Down. But
exactly.
No, I don't think so.
And that's kind of my point. Like, so more background with me is I'm a personal trainer, or was. Now I'm a manager. And when we get people,
he went from worker to manager,
who are not in shape, they need to lose weight, they have a lot of other bad health habits and just life habits that are wrong with them. We don't talk about, like, a lot of them come in thinking like, well, this is just how it is what it is, and they have that mindset already. And I feel like the more that you talk about that, rather than saying it's the personal choice, we all should do that, it pushes a wrong message.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, both of these things are true. There's a reason why the rates of obesity and being overweight have skyrocketed in America over the past 50 years. It's not.
I'm not reacting to Vaush right now. I'm actually just trying to think about like how unsure the caller was about his own. Well, maybe I'll rewind it, which is bad Twitch streaming form. But let's see, his question was more like, you don't want to give people the wrong message by just get the all or nothing approach of having a social or a material analysis of people's behavior is making excuses for them. This is based on that kind of a very specific individualist philosophy where you are responsible for your actions, nothing else. Nothing else could be responsible, because otherwise our legal and justice system wouldn't work, because it's entirely motive and action based. Not just action based, but it's like actions you take personally, right? Someone steals a loaf of bread because their family's starving. It doesn't matter. The context doesn't matter. Although in the sentencing it does. But as far as the rules, the law, the jurisprudence, it's all like, you did it, you did the crime, you're going to serve the time. Because we can't do collective punishment, like, punishment of the society for letting people starve. The whole headcanon there.
A lot of other bad health habits and just life habits that are wrong with them. We don't talk about, like, a lot of them come in.
Yeah. So like, you could do a whole material analysis of why people have bad habits. Well, sometimes like convenience isn't always something that was demanded by consumers. It's something that's supplied because we have a supply side economy. But the conveniences are also in a way necessary because of our industrial economy. Example, basically take a look at any aspect of urban life. You need, because how does it start? It starts with the rich driving, and then because they're driving, and they have economic power, urban policy then has to shift towards more car driving. Then it shifts enough that certain whole neighborhoods or the city starts stretching out. And then, also because of disinvestment, because of the rich gaining certain power and privileges, mass transit goes down or declines, disinvestment. Then everyone has to drive cars. Because everyone's driving cars, then you need whole new industries and conveniences to service car culture. Car culture is amazingly wasteful, and thus you need parking lots, and that creates other physical problems. And so, kind of like to blame an individual on having road rage, let's say, when there's all of these structural reasons that make driving a chore and agonizingly stressful. I mean, you could die every time you're in a car. 30,000 do every year in America. That's what.
Thinking like, well, this is just how it is. It is what it is. And they have that mindset already. And I feel like the more that you talk about.
Yeah, so he's complaining about that, people have social excuses. They're not going to do anything personally to improve things. I would consider this a straw man. I don't know if I've ever yet met anybody. In fact, it's actually the opposite. That's actually where I was kind of checking out this conversation, and why Vaush didn't call out the thing that I would call out with this caller, right? Is that in my experience working with the actual homeless, which I have, is that actually it's not that they make excuses for themselves, right? That I'm an alcoholic or that I have these injuries because of these structural issues. It's actually because they don't. They are purely individualist. In fact, the most purely individualistic people may not be the 1%. It's the homeless. Not as a entire group, mind you, right? I'm talking about particularly homeless middle-aged men. So it's a particular demographic here. But they talked and they treated themselves and they looked at and they viewed their lives through the lens of individual choices, individual responsibility, despite and yes, and their ability to survive in the group home that they lived in was purely through a nonprofit, and it was charity. Although there were HUD grants at work that funded quite a bit of it, the homeless shelters, that is. But it was also a lot of charity, and so it still just becomes individualism. It's personal. People are personally responsible for giving charity. There's no collective responsibility in housing the homeless, which is why even though there was this building of for 30, then there was another 100 that was still out in the streets without proper shelter.
That rather than saying it's the personal choice, we all should do that. It pushes a wrong message.
Let's go back to what Vaush
because that's not true. Americans work more hours than ever. What you have to talk about is a bunch of complicated social factors, right? For poverty, and it's the same way for a bunch of other things. And I don't think it's bad to inform people on the sociological
Before anyone asks, my background's in architecture, of urban issues, science, art, design, kind of holistic in that way. And geology, history, it's everything. It's a little bit of everything. So it might be the most well-rounded.
That lead to a given state of affairs.
I think that's where our big disagreement is. I know that you say that because I believe you've talked about this before, about how people are predictable and they'll do what they.
My view of other people is complete straw man. And this isn't a rare thing. This is something everyone's always constantly doing, it seems. Or when anyone makes the rant that I would be against, like other people, if there's systemic issues, that's an excuse for them to not do anything. Line where people are truly not truly hopeless, but like they're not worth engaging because they actually do believe, like, oh yeah, if it was me, I would let him die. I am a greedy, selfish bastard, and thus it's not so much other people are terrible, it's that I'm terrible and I want everyone to be like me. Meanwhile, the people who are like this guy who's very good to What's the comment here? I own Vaush in many debates. Good for you, buddy. Do you publicly own him? Privately own him? I think we should collectively own Vaush. See, that's what seizing the means really looks like. But now I've broken my thought.
What society says, and the more that you say this is the norm.
Oh yeah. The moderates like this or sockdems like this, they believe that everyone else is a lazy asshole, but they're not because they have a job. He's working at a gym, and he's climbing the ladder, so to speak. I'm to the right of Vaush. Oh, okay, man. If you think you won in debates with him, no opinion.
People are okay with being the norm. And I understand that policies can be passed. So if we're talking about obesity, right, you can pass something to have higher taxes on sugar or some bullshit. I don't know. I don't know any of this shit. But you can do something.
Oh yeah, I think that was the other thing that like kind of made me rage quit watching this with my morning cereal. That both this guy and Vaush many times are working from a place of ignorance and acting like they know shit. And then they can make assumptions about society or other people when they don't know anything. And they publicly admit they don't know, not anything, but they don't know this or that. Okay, then don't have an opinion on it. Wait till you're informed, then form an opinion. It's a simple step 1, step 2. Learn more about a subject, then form an opinion. It's the simplest critical thinking advice I can give at this time. It's strange that critical thinking is taught like, maybe even sometimes my first instinct is teach people all the fallacies, teach people how to debate, argue. Like, maybe that's like kind of like, how to put it? There's more base things to do that learning how to argue and debate teach you to do, and that includes the fallacies and stuff. But no, pick a subject you don't know things about and may be curious about because you don't understand, and then form your opinion. I can usually destroy lefties in debates with facts and logic. Not always, but often. Yes, correct. Don't speak on the show. I mean, as a college-educated boy, I didn't go to college to get a degree for a job, for a career. In fact, I shun these things. I am a true hippie in that way. I went to college to understand the world, right? And this is why I actually under like my resume wasn't padded. I didn't have hireable skills. I didn't take responsibility for that. I took responsibility to be informed about the world. I took more theory courses. I took more history courses because I love history, got a minor. And I went to architecture school. So I am learning, of course, all of the base skills of architecture, design, and all these other things. I'm saying that now. Architecture, major, minor in history. And that was 6 years because architecture school is 5 years at least. And it was an extra year because there were a flood of studied history in high school. Does that go beyond the U.S. history, world history core courses? Fortnite Skilled Game. Very old name there. Sort of backhanded compliment. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, education across the board. Doesn't matter if you're a liberal or not liberal state. It's quite bad. It depends on the teacher at times, but that's why I did a lot more history studying in college. YouTube videos are Like I was just watching one. What was I didn't catch the title of it, but there's a lot of good history channels, right? There's a Time Ghost. It's a good basic overview. Like it's just high school history or social studies, education. Ideological rock, not doing. It's kind of like school we did. So that's kind of where you're like, oh, so everything is mystical. Its own. I don't know if you have a lot of lag. Ah, okay. Yeah, no, I'm getting an error message in the bottom. I don't know why. My Wi-Fi isn't the best. I'm basically hijacking it from next door with permission. It's not a internet cable. Perhaps make sure this is actually something I keep doing. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So yeah, yeah, it just keeps going in and out. This is why I don't live stream on Facebook. I was doing that for a time with the podcast I do. Via. So let's see if it's error. It goes. There's an error. So if I'm clipping every time there's an error, I may just need to actually get an internet connection, my own. But at the moment, I'm underemployed. I do not have my. I definitely don't want. I was joking about the own lefties. Oh, really? You're joking? As if that line isn't a cliche. No, cliches are jokes. Yes, I understand that. I'm not dumb. Rather naive. I am not naive to all of this. Again, I know quite a bit about streaming. I've done extensive research on streaming. Not on the actual technical aspects. I'm going to learn that as I go. But as far as watching Vaush for 2 years, or a year and a half, high schools need comparative politics as comparative religions, comparative politics, and comparative history. Like not just like history or herstory, but also history from other places, from other points of view. There's usually not enough time, right? There's just enough time to get history from. Oh, thank you, Brett. Now, please understand that I do a weekly podcast called The Three Lefts Show that is on all podcast apps, and that's mostly 2 hours. It's never full 2 hours because I do it on radio. So there's bumpers and things get clipped, and I basically edit it down so it's more like an hour 40 every week, and that's the more structured, semi-scripted show. This is going to be all the stories that basically don't fit into the topics of that program. So let's see if I think this is where I stop, but maybe let's do a few more minutes.
Or if you don't talk about the big social implications, though, you lose the ability to make any systemic changes. Our tax, welfare, and education, everything regarding healthcare, all big social decisions have to be based on people susceptible to their environmental conditions. What you're advocating for here is right ignorance. You're advocating for an ignorance of sociology because you think that it would encourage people to be more individually responsible. But I've seen any to indicate that there is a positive correlation between ignorance and personal accountability.
He's definitely right about that. He's right about that. But I think his response.
I also haven't seen much where there's a widespread problem and the of the social made it so that big policies get passed as far as what
about social security?
Poverty.
Oh yeah. Oh, here's where I didn't have a fit, of course. I don't rage quit when I'm eating breakfast, of course. But what I mean is so he's trying to puzzle out a way of talking of the caller that awareness of social problems leads to more personal responsibility. Well, you have to show there needs to be evidence that awareness of social problems lead to less personal responsibility. But it seems like the people who are most let's actually use the nomenclature here. Are more woke people less personally responsible? Depends on what you mean. mean, corporate woke, they're down responsible people. They're well-paid, they're middle class-ish. Um, woke of conscious of social issues like poverty and crime. I took a sociology 201 course, probably something that Vaush did himself, but I stopped at 201. And it was social problems. It was divided into units. We looked at poverty, education, criminal justice, and more, and or crime. And the end of the semester is a paper where we take two we talked about and relate them to each other. How do they interact? How do they interrelate? Do they? Of course they do. That's the assumption, of course. It's a conceit. Of course they relate. Challenge to the student is to write about using their own sources and interpretation on how they relate. I picked education and poverty. Clearly, being poor affects your education. Not just because you're going to school hungry, that's a personal problem. But then there's the systemic issue of how the schools are funded. They're funded with property taxes. Districts with low property tax revenue can't fund schools as well as those with high property tax revenue. The rich, even when it's all public schools, literally get better education than poor students. And the priorities of those, mentioned when he wrote a essay or semi-paper about it, he investigated, and his conclusion, or at least the thing he uncovered for himself, was that upper class schools, whether they be private or just well-funded public schools, they treat students as potential leaders, managers. If you're in a poor school, you are treated as a potential worker and you only need to know this much instead of this much. You don't get taught critical thinking. So when people complain about education policy or America's schools, there's always those extra questions to ask of which schools, whose schools. The conceit of liberalism is that everything's equal. Everything's kind of the same or leveled out somehow. What world are they living in, right? But they believe, or at least this is general American ideology, that everything's fair. Everything's already fair. And when you say they're not fair, you're a whiner who's just making excuses. Hopefully my brother doesn't watch this, but he was complaining on Facebook that he was outside of his own home mistaken for being homeless. And reactors were like, oh no, oh, that sucks. And he mentioned himself, it wasn't fun. And then who I've talked to him many times about my job with the semi-homeless, well, imagine how fun it is to be homeless. How you're looked down on, and basically your very presence is criminalized or seen as suspicious. Just existing is sus. Imagine a life like that, where everywhere you go, you're looked down on, or you're treated as someone to push away because you smell, because there's no public, yeah, and depending on where you live, the shelters are full. There's no choice. This thought also occurred to me in the context of non-homelessness, but a creation of it, with people on the not the pedophile list, but the sex offender list, and you had towns that under the panic of saving save the children, effectively ban on any sex offender list from living there. You'd think that this would be illegal, especially if it's someone lived in that town. It was their home, built a life there. But then through some twist of fate, and trust me, and I covered this, only like 20% of those on the sex offender list actually committed what would be considered a sexual crime. One person was put on the list for simply being, his server was used to bounce child porn around. He was totally, and he is charged as a sex criminal. Again, yeah, like 25% were actually like, sexual harassment. or a sexual harassment is a higher percentage, and that's something that can be cured is the wrong word. People can be rehated. There can be restitution. There can be restorative practice.
Or Medicare or Medicaid or any of our welfare policies. Or
let me just stop here. A2 breakdown with HWB. Oh, sorry, WB. Good to meet you, WB. Breakdown. An RT show? Yeah.
Public education.
I mean, I don't know much about that, but I feel like
I don't know much about that.
It may have had an impact on
but I feel
certain
like it
people,
has an
but
impact.
it didn't solve the problem.
What do you mean? Like, so there were two approaches
here. Oh yeah, and I take issue with like Vaush's example of Social Security or something. Like how just the whole like people were conscious of the fact that the country was in poverty and thus legislation again, like people talk about they know politics when they don't, or they have a understanding of government. Now, truly, the more you know, the more angry and upset you are, and the more you want to burn things down. That's, that's the plan, so to speak, the agenda. Like, yes, everyone should know more about how the government works. They'd be more radical if they did. The more you know about how the economy works, the more you're going to want post-capitalism. And again, when I say post-capitalism, it's like, it doesn't have to be socialist, but it's going to likely have elements of it. But you don't have to be a socialist to say, I hate capitalism, I want something else. And there's a lot of options out there.
Like, you have public education, and you can say like, oh, public education is just an entitlement. Oh, by saying the reason why people aren't getting good enough education is because we don't have any schools in America, you're just giving excuses to people's individual lack of motivation. Or you could just build public schools. And like, we know the positive outcome here is just to make positive changes to people's environment.
Right. I'm just saying I don't think I think when you go about it, maybe this is just where I lose touch with the lefty community, right? I feel like going about it by promoting policy is impact. I mean, at least I
oh yeah, this is where
haven't seen it. Like my whole life, everyone has been saying how like obesity is a problem, poverty is a problem, the relationship cops is a problem.
In his own life, he has not seen how public opinion or people caring about an issue. This would be where you start becoming more leftist or more radical. Radicalized is not the same as being left. To me, they're inseparable. Because otherwise you're reactionary. But it's through his ignorance of how government works, of why it is that there's an insistence on solving a problem and then policy doesn't fix the problem. Well, maybe it's not so much. So he says it's a matter of you can't use policy to fix social problems. So there must be individualist solutions, or we have to rely on individual solutions because we can't use social policy to solve social problems. But that is the wrong conclusion through probably a number of bad premises. Bad premise one, and this is critical thinking 102. Let's say that it's not like so. Form good opinions based on learning more about it. And by learning more, I don't mean using just YouTube videos. I mean looking at research, reading books, or summaries of books. You shouldn't have to go to school and pay a lot of money for it, but let me put it this way. Maybe you don't have to pay for it, but college is roughly a 4-year endeavor. To spend 4 years basically reading books, or doing projects if you're not so much a good reader. Like, say, Vaush, he says he doesn't like reading. My mother also doesn't like reading, at least when it comes to nonfiction. She'll read dime store novels. But regardless, doing projects, just 4 years, just learning stuff, not being in the labor market, that's kind of necessary. Similar to how high school, again, you could be in the labor market, but maybe you want to spend more time in academic clubs and doing extra stuff, like learning an instrument, being creative, doing things, building up hobbies so you have more going on in your life. So then when there's a pandemic, you're not left to do nothing. In my life, the pandemic actually changed my life very little. Now, I had an essential job, so there's that. But there's also that I had my podcast that I do. I do activism. And yes, a lot of it kind of stopped, but of course, with things popping off, it seemed like there was more of it than ever. It's only more than 2019.
And everyone's been promoting policies to change it, but I haven't seen any that has really impacted it, and it makes me lose faith in a government being able to do that.
We do.
Here's where this is one out of many small problems. I don't have like a big problem with Vaush. A lot of small problems. So this guy's rather he comes to a natural conclusion that the system doesn't work. And Vaush, being the contrarian, being in debate lord mode, being a debate lord, he has to contradict the caller. If the caller says, I don't think the system works, it doesn't seem to listen to the people, right? Now, but he's coming at it from the space of that's why no collective action should ever be taken, because what's the ultimate in collective action is government and the state. But you'd think the task of an anarchist like Vaush would point out that collective action and collective responsibility, again, a term he does not use at all, which surprises me. You'd think he'd know such a phrase, being a sociologist or a sociology major. But instead, he has to push back and basically say, no, government, of course, can